Okay, Brian, come on up here. All right, it's time for snacks. Let's go. Oh. The guy that used to do this was a whole lot better than I.
Okay.
I
don't know if there's a good at this. Just ask questions.
Well, part of the rest of that comment was that you might be grateful that I'm doing it instead of he was.
Okay, because I was going to say, it seems like my job is the harder one here. It's like you just have to ask them.
Well, yeah, but it took me a while to form some of these.
Okay, so. Fair enough.
Okay, now you told us that you're from the Gladstone Christian Church originally.
That's right.
Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. All right. You, for whatever reason, and I'm not going to presume on this, you didn't tell us anything in your biography about your wife except for her name.
Ah.
So tell us about your wife, where she's from, how you met, when you met. All that good stuff.
The whole thing.
The whole thing.
What's really funny about this question is that now I may be presuming here, but this is a funny question because if a woman asks a woman this question, it's going to be like 45 minutes. If a man asks a man this question, it's like a paragraph.
Well, feel free to split the difference someplace.
And I know this because I heard some of you asking my wife how we met and all that stuff. I don't know who it was, but it was going on. Anyway, so Kelsey.
I understand that completely.
Yeah. So Kelsey's from Southern California. She grew up in Huntington Beach. Technically, some other Westminster, which is kind of not a well-known spot, but it's right there next to Huntington Beach. So, we joke that she is one of those dreaded Californians that keeps moving up to Oregon, which in Central Oregon, we talk about those people all the time. It's like there's two groups of people moving to Central Oregon, people from the Valley and Californians. And all of them are, but anyway. So she is from Huntington Beach. We met in college. My undergrad years were at Hope International University, which used to be Pacific Christian College, and then it was HIU, and then actually now, if I were to go there today, I would graduate again from Pacific Christian College. These things are kind of cyclical. The university has kind of gone more the university route and now has different colleges that you can attend and all that. But so we met there. We were married in 2011. That was right after we both, so I'm 1 year older than her, so I was a year ahead of her in school. So I graduated, I hung around Southern California for a year extra, one extra year that I didn't need to stay in California, but then we both moved up to Oregon. I started working at Tiger Christian Church there in 2011. So yeah, we met at school. We met actually doing musicals. The school would put on musicals, and I have done a couple of musicals in my day. I would not dare attempt that today, but yeah, that's how we met. She's the oldest of 5 girls, and so she's well equipped for us to have 2 daughters. I'm less so. Okay.
Now, do you have other siblings?
I have 1 older brother.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was telling the folks at breakfast today, my family, aside from my older brother, he has a daughter, so I have a niece. And aside from her, our direct family had only had boys for, I believe, 9 generations.
So had to wait for this generation to.
And now it's all the girls.
Yeah.
And I really thought, like, obviously we're going to have boys.
Oh, sure.
And then we got the email these days, how they do it. We got the email that told us a gender, Gwenny, when she was going to be born. And I just was like, no, that's got to be wrong. They've made a mistake. As it turns out, they don't really make mistakes on that these days, but no.
Good. Well, congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. By the way, this is not David Letterman doing an interview. This is anybody who wants to ask a question. Feel free. Okay. Break in. Throw something, or whatever. So. If you want to ask additional questions, please.
I want to know what musicals you did.
Oh, okay. See there? See there? This is going to take a lot longer than you
No,
thought.
yeah. I did Oklahoma, and then I did Horton Hears a Who, the Seussical. Yeah. Yeah. So. Oh, yeah, of course, you got to ask that. I was the grandfather in Oklahoma, and then I was one of the 3 monkeys in Seussical. So.
Typecast right from the start.
Yeah, it's like they just never let me break out.
During your college years, did you have ministries or extra, jobs or whatever?
Yeah. So what's funny is my undergrad degree is in music and like worship arts, and I enjoyed that. In hindsight, it's like I've only really ever wanted to do Bible stuff. So it was funny that I got that degree, but because of that, though, I got to have a lot of involvement with different things that the school's doing. So at the school, I served as a chapel worship leader. And then I worked with several different youth ministries in areas around there in Southern California, and just did stuff with, over the 4 years that I was there, a couple of different ministries there working with students. And then when I graduated from Hope, that year that I spent down there, I was working part-time at a church in Rancho Santa Margarita as a worship leader there. And then I also was an RA at Hope. And so it was a ministry in itself, especially my junior and senior year, and I had these freshman halls. And it's interesting, there's a big difference between a senior and a freshman in college. And so, yeah. But I stayed involved with local churches the whole way through my undergraduate program.
I know that Hope requires some Bible. Did you take any classes from anybody named Richardson?
Oh, yeah.
Which one?
Both.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah, both.
Okay. Steve Richardson and his son Casey Richardson. Steve is retired and moved to Idaho. He didn't go to Central Oregon. He moved to Idaho.
Okay.
And but
I'm sure Idaho appreciates
there,
that.
well, the first thing he did is got rid of his California license.
Right.
Yeah.
Burn all the evidence.
Yeah. I don't have to explain that anymore, do I? No. All right. Okay. Your bio piece on the back of our bulletin says you like to read theology.
Sure.
Define that. Well,
isn't it in?
Okay,
I like to read.
I'll explain that. Does that mean you sit down and like to read Karl Barth's Church Dogmatics, or
Yes,
you
it
like
does-
to,
it
you like
means
to read
that.
Karl Barth's Church Dogmatics?
Well, I mean, not only.
I hope not, because
But yeah, I mean, I like to read. So, like, I quoted from The City of God by Augustine, and so I'm reading that, and I'm enjoying it quite a bit. So, really, the heart that I have behind that is one of the things I see in the church today is that there's a lot of division and a lot of tribalism, and a lot of that is. Some of that is significant, meaning some of that is meaningful differences in actual sort of ministry philosophy or whatever. But some of that is just, we've separated over the centuries now into our different camps, and we just think the other guys are the bad guys, kind of. And when we actually go back, so one of the reasons I like reading old theology is that we can read things from 1600 years ago and realize that, oh, okay, things weren't actually all that different back then. Like the flavor was different because there was different part of the world, different, obviously, technology and all that kind of stuff. But the fundamental issues were the same. And so when we can look at Augustine and see that, oh my gosh, he said some things that are actually perfectly relevant to where we're at today, we can pull from that stream. We can look at, John Calvin and some of the things that he wrote. And I know, like, in the Christian church, John Calvin is often sort of like the boogeyman. Like he will come and like eat your children if you're not careful. But the reality is, if we go and read him, like probably 90% of what he wrote, Christian church folks would be like, yes, absolutely yes. And then there are some things that he wrote that were like, no, I don't think so. But the point being that I like reading those things because it's good to get somewhere that transcends just our camps that we've settled into in our tribes. So I enjoy that because I like to get a picture of what the church has thought.
Okay.
The church has been doing this a long time.
Do you have any particular favorite authors in that genre?
Well, the problem is that's a huge genre.
Well, that's why I asked the question, because
Sure, yeah. So I probably would, I guess, maybe divide that into eras. But I really, from maybe more recent, I really like A.W. Tozer.
okay.
I really like John Frame, even though, see, again, like John Frame, he comes from a Presbyterian background, so there are obviously some things that I'm not going to really go with, but he wrote a book called The Doctrine of the Christian Life, and it's a book on ethics, and it's incredible. It honestly is incredible. And so, any deep thinkers, but so he's got a whole series of books, A Doctrine and Knowledge of God, The Doctrine of the Christian Life, and a third one that I haven't picked up yet, but so he's good. I like reading C.S. Lewis. I know he's a favorite of pretty much everybody, I think. I don't know if anybody doesn't like C.S. Lewis.
Lots of us, yeah. Okay. Do you read, I couldn't think of the word, but recreational reading, stuff that's not related to?
I have. I don't a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. Because, and then maybe I'm just an oddity or whatever, but to me, like to read the City of God, like that is recreational.
Okay.
I enjoy it. So,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I like to read. I would say if I were to read sort of recreational, I do enjoy just reading history. So I like to read like the history of our country, but also just world and church history.
Okay.
Not necessarily specified at like some theological topic, but just to read the stories of the past.
Okay.
So
Okay.
a lot of that is I enjoy reading things that make me think things that I've never thought about. That's healthy for us.
That's the purpose of it.
That's
isn't
right.
it?
To come across things, even from authors that I think, I don't know if I align with this person on everything, but that's healthy. That's healthy to be able to interact with people who have a different sort of stream of tradition than our tribe has. So.
And you'll probably find that most of the time there won't ever be a book that you completely agree with.
I don't even completely agree with myself.
Yeah.
I argue with myself on a consistent basis. But what I'm encouraged by that though is we go and read people that are from traditions that are outside of our own, and we still find that, wow, these people love Jesus, and they have some really good things to say that we would do well to heed.
Oh, yeah.
And so that there's solidarity there. And again, I said on Monday night, I think the church is headed for hard times. I think society is headed for hard times. And so we need to be more unified, not less. We need to draw the right lines very clearly around gospel, around true Christian faith, but we need to actually have unity with other people who love Jesus, even if they're outside of our tradition.
I know of a church group that's kind of worked toward that over the last 200 years.
Okay, sure, yeah. Yep.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. George.
How about modern?
How about
Modern.
Modern what?
Modern thinkers.
Modern thinkers? I don't pay as much attention to them. I tend to read more like dead people.
Okay, that answered my question.
Okay.
Okay, how about David Hume or Bishop Berkeley or...
David Hume, like the philosopher?
Right? Do you get into that?
Some, but only... So I'll read like Hume or Rousseau or a little bit, some of these philosophers, only to get an understanding of like, why does our world think the way it does today?
Okay. Okay, that's where I was at.
And again, I think that's helpful. So I've done a lot of reading into what is called postmodernism,
Right.
and all that stuff. And honest to God, a lot of that stuff just sounds crazy to me when I read it. But
I don't argue with that.
yeah, but I will say it really goes all the way back to like 300 or 400 years ago. Some conclusions that were reached that I fundamentally disagree with. But if I were to accept those conclusions, everything today makes a lot more sense.
Sure.
So, and that's the problem there is we're not ever just, this is what I think, honestly, Paul means in Ephesians 6 when he says we're not wrestling against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and authorities and powers of evil that are ruling over this present age. The idea is that like we are always fighting a war of ideas, a war of truth or lies, and that's subtle. It means that like my neighbor who doesn't agree with me, my conflict is not really me against them. The conflict that we have really actually goes way deeper than that, back to thoughts that came through sort of the philosophical realm like 300-400 years ago, and then are just trickling into popular culture today. But they're old ideas. They're old, wrong, foolish, false ideas.
Have you ever read or listened to John Lennox?
John Lennox.
Yeah, he debates with, I think, Richard Dawkins on atheism versus...
Yeah. I don't think I've read much of him, but I do know of his debates that he's had.
Cambridge is where he's from.
Okay.
C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. Yeah.
I read an article some years ago that the argument of the author was it's a good thing to read old books.
Yeah.
And I don't disagree with that at all. I thought that was a
C.S.
great
Lewis wrote a preface to a book by Athanasius, who lived in the 4th century. Mm-hmm. And Athanasius' book was called On the Incarnation. And it's a book about why did the Word of God become flesh? And again, it's incredible. And C.S. Lewis wrote a preface to a modern translation of this book. And in this preface, he says that, he says two really good things. One is he says, I have often found that I sit down to modern devotional books and nothing happens. And then he says, but when I sit down and I work through a tough bit of actual theology with a pencil in my hand and a pipe in my teeth, my spirit sings. Okay, now I'm not saying go get a pipe. I'm just saying C.S. Lewis was a pipe guy. But anyway, and then the other thing he said is talking about specifically reading old books. And he said, one, modern authors, ones that want to summarize what the old books say, they take 10 times as many words to summarize. And what you find from that is their mind is not the equal of those that came before. Because these people, like Athanasius or Augustine or Irenaeus, or these old people, were able to actually write some profound ideas in not that long. And so the irony, C.S. Lewis says in his preface, is that many students today, many people today, are intimidated to pick up old books because they think they will not be able to understand them. And he says the irony of that is, number one, they are. You have to think. You have to be, careful and thoughtful and studious. But they're not going to be that hard to understand. And number two, the modern authors today that you're going to pick up who summarize them, they are hard to understand. And he says we benefit from picking up old books and reading them. And then the other thing he says about that is that every age has its own blind spots. We all have every age, every society, culture, generation even, has certain things that it's more able to grasp quickly and other things that it's blind to. And so he says what that means is we have to read the books that will help reveal our blind spots. And that means the old books, because they were written in a time where they didn't have the same blind spots that we do today. And so part of my whole love of church history and trying to read old things is that we have a tendency today to believe that the church started 5 minutes ago or 50 years ago. or 200 years ago? And we don't really know. The church started 2,000 years ago. It started a long time before my life, before our church, before our movement of churches, before our Reformation. Like, it started a long time ago. And there's wisdom. There's true, real wisdom that has vibrance and relevance today to be found throughout the age of the church. So anyway, that's my spiel for go read more books.
Okay, do you read paper books or do you read online books?
Both. So, some of that is, sometimes that decision's made for me because I have a Bible software that has a enormous library in it. And so I have a lot of books just in that library. And so that ship has sailed. Like that decision's made for me, so I pick up my tablet and I read it there. I also enjoy reading paper books. But some of the books I read are really large. So I kind of I'm happy to have them on Kindle or on my Bible software because this is not like a 9-pound book. This is not like 500 9-pound books. So there's kind of a little bit of a convenience there, but I do like the feel of pages. I like the smell of an old book and all this stuff. But at the same time, the words are there to read either way. And the benefit is not in the material of the pages, it's in the wisdom of the words.
You kind of brought up a verse in talk about the rulers of darkness of this world and
Yeah.
wickedness in high places.
Yeah.
Could you go into that a little bit?
Oh, yikes. Okay.
Repeat the question.
Yeah. So the question was to go into more of sort of the rulers in the heavenly places. So we could go, that's Ephesians chapter 6. So let me find that real quick so I don't misquote it. Would be it.
It's easy for us to do this.
Yes. Yeah, I got the wrong thing here. So Ephesians. See, if I just had a paper book, I could flip to it, but I got to type it in because. Okay, so Ephesians chapter 6, starting verse 10. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. That's always a good reminder, don't you think? But against the rulers, the authorities, and then this is a terrifying phrase here, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Okay, so the idea there is that there are only two kingdoms. One of the ideas that our world has bought today, and this kind of has to do with that postmodernism, that modern philosophy, modern secularism, and I say that not even in a bad sense, but just secular. The myth of secularism is that there exists some neutral point of view. There exists some neutral perspective, like an arena of thoughts that's not on any side, it's just the neutral ground. And we should all come there to discuss things. The problem is that doesn't exist. There is no neutral ground. There is no conversation that we have interpersonally or even societally, publicly. There's no conversation and there's no ideology that is neutral. Every ideology is charged, is coming from somewhere and saying something and making certain claims about our world and about God or not God, about who God is or what God is, or like there's everything that people say is, this is what I said on biblical theology. Everybody does theology. Everybody does theology. Everybody has opinions on God, whether he exists or not. Those are both theological positions. On whether God is a he, a she, a them, an it, the whole universe, like whatever. All of those are theologically charged ideas. And so the idea then is, our world though believes that some things are religious and other things are not religious. Some things are secular and other things are sacred. But that's not a biblical worldview. Everything is theological. Everything is spiritual. So all that to say, there's only two kingdoms. the kingdom of Jesus and the kingdom of darkness. And the Bible teaches that this present age is ruled by the kingdom. It is the kingdom of darkness. So Colossians chapter 1, Paul says that the Father has delivered us out of the kingdom of darkness and into the kingdom of his beloved Son. So there's always this conflict. And what that means is that ultimately, and we have in Timothy, I forget which one now, the address is escaping me, but where he says that in later times, some people are going to, we talked about this, some people are going to follow the teachings of demons. And that's not like this thing that you're going to be able to clearly identify. As far as, it's not going to make itself known that like, hey, here's a demon getting up to give a lecture. That's not how it's going to be. It's going to be people adopting ideas, or not it's going to be, it is people that adopt ideas that are counter to Jesus, that are contrary to the kingdom of God. And those ideas are not just born out of human minds. Those ideas are coming from spiritual entities and spiritual realities. And so I don't have, like, I don't want to make the mistake of looking for the devil, like, under every bush and rock, right? But at the same time, we're foolish in the extreme, to ignore the reality that there are dark demonic forces that at work that deceive people, that give ideas that are completely wrong and destructive and ruinous. And it is against those entities that our true battle is with. Which then tells us, that's why Paul tells us to put on the whole armor of God, because that is not a fight that any of us is equipped to fight in and of ourselves. I've told our churches last week, we were talking about this a little bit. I said, I enjoy shooting, right? I like guns, I like shooting stuff, I like hunting, this kind of stuff. I do not own the weapon that is capable of wounding a demon, right? Like, that is not a fight that we are equipped to win. And some of what we see sometimes, like, there's an element of our culture that has a bizarre view that, like, you know, the end times are upon us, and so what do we need to do? We, like, need to get our rifles. And I'm like, yeah, that's not, like, no, what? That's not how, like, yeah. So anyway, there are dark realities that are behind. So when we look at in our culture, some of the ideas that are coming through, we got to recognize their dark influence. Does that answer your question somewhat? It's a huge topic, but we don't want to ignore spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Yeah.
Ryan, how do you go about your study, your reading? Do you write in the margins? When you see a book, do you do the title and the content and introduction?
Are you talking about, like, for sermons?
Or just...
Or like for the Bible, you mean, though?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So my process on...
Repeat it.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so the question is, how do I do my study? And I'll narrow that just so that I can answer it to just preparing for a sermon, studying the Bible. For me, what I will do is I translate every passage that I preach from the original language, either Hebrew or Greek. And most of the reason that I do that is that I'm not fantastically, like, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, okay? I'm very slow. I'm still a baby at it, to be honest with you, in both Hebrew and Greek. But the benefit of reading the Bible in Greek, for example, is that because I'm not as good at reading Greek as I am at reading English, like, I can just blast through something in English and not even pay much attention to it because I can just make quick sense of it, right? When I read it in Greek, I have to slow down because I cannot read it if I don't read it slowly. And what then that does is that right there, like, I mean, just reading the Bible slowly gives you a lot of insight into what it's saying. So that's the first step for me always, is I translate the passage. And what I'm saying there, to maybe give something that you can grasp on, because how many people in here read Greek? No problem if you don't. No problem if you don't. The maybe application for you then is read your Bible slowly. Read it slowly. Pay attention to every single word. But so I'll do that, and then I will make some observations that I can make on what seems to be being said here. Then I'll go through and I'll just do some study with different resources that I have in my Bible software, but you can get these hard books too, like Bible surveys, historical surveys, these kinds of things, because I'm wanting to look for, is there anything in the context historically of this time period that would help me make sense of what's being said here? Then I'll get a concordance, and I'll look at any and all cross-references I can find. So is this passage referring to any other passage in the Bible? Is it alluding to any other passage in the Bible? And if so, what insight does that shed on the meaning of the text that I'm in? Then I'll kind of craft like a little bit of an outline of what the passage is saying, and then at the very end, I'll read some commentaries and see like what do other authors think about what this means, and have I missed anything, or have I reached a conclusion that nobody else has reached? And if that's the case, I probably need to revisit it. In my estimation, I have about 80 commentaries on any given book of the Bible that I can consult. And if I start to read through those and I realize that the conclusion that I have reached, none of them have reached, I'm probably wrong. Meaning, the truth is probably not that Brian Burns in 2022 has actually stumbled upon a gem of wisdom that the church in 2,000 years has just been unable to uncover. That's not true. Okay? If nobody's thought this before, I'm probably wrong. That's what that kind of means. So all that to say, I go work through that really pretty robustly, and then so all that's first, and then I will write. Like, now what do I want to say about this passage on Sunday for our church? And usually it's like everything over in the study column, like 20% of that actually makes it into a sermon, because there's probably like 4 or 5 hours worth of things to talk about over here. And then I have, in our church, I have maybe an hour. Like that's how long our sermons go, 45 minutes or so. But at the back, and then I saw one there.
When you use the term church, that term didn't show up until like 300.
We're actually going to talk about that today. That very thing right there, we're going to talk about in about an hour. So
come back.
So we'll table that one. The question had to do with the word church didn't show up until, okay, fine, we'll just do it now. It'll save us some time on the back end. So the word church, we're not totally even sure where this word came from. There's two possibilities. It either came from and I'll just get my note here so I can get it right. But it either came from a German word, Kyriaka. Okay, so we've got, where is it here? Kirka, which then would have come from the Greek Kyriake, and that means of the Lord, because the Greek word for Lord is kurios. Okay, so that's one option. The other argument is that our English word church comes from an Anglo-Saxon word kirke, which would have come from the Latin circus, which is kind of funny.
Not inappropriate sometimes.
Now, in Latin, though, that term means like circle or ring. And the idea there, people argue that the early church met in a circle. And so there's that whole thing. But neither of those, that's not the word. Neither of those words are ever used in the New Testament. The word in the New Testament that we translate church is the word ecclesia. And this has to do with, there's two notes of it. One is it had to do with the legislative assembly of the Roman Senate. So when the assembly was called to assemble together and handle some socio-political business, that gathering was called the ecclesia, right? So the basic meaning of the word is not church, but gathering or assembly. And this word was used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament to talk about Israel when Israel assembled to worship Yahweh. So where that then goes, and we're going to talk about gathering as the church this morning, but the reason that's really important is that the church is a gathering of people. It is not, it's more than that, but it's not less than that. So by way of maybe illustration here, Any favorite sports teams in here? Okay, Seahawks, Mariners, okay, whatever, yeah. So let's say, okay, yep. So let's say that the Seahawks, what defines their team? Well, it's more than the fact that they get together and practice and play games, but it's not less than that. So in other words, if the Seahawks decided we're still going to be a team, but we are never going to actually get together and play this game. Like we'll just sort of virtually get together. Okay, they're not a team anymore, right? Like the fact that they gather is like intrinsic in the very meaning of the term. That's ecclesia. The church is defined in the very fact that these people assemble together and they gather to worship the living God together. They gather to administer the ordinances, right? They gather to do the Lord's Supper, to hear the preaching of the Word of God. They gather to baptize. So all these things, the church gathers. And that's one of the reasons that, like, our church has an online, well, we don't have an online service. We post our things online. The reason I say it that way is that's a benefit in the specific sense that if there are people who are shut-ins or are sick or whatever, and we can get them set up, if they can tune in online, that's better than nothing, right? The other benefit of that is literally every single person who has come into our church since I've been there has first listened to our sermons online. So people want to listen to the sermons of a church and see, like in our case, they come because they hear sermons and they think this is like Bible that they're doing here, and they like that, so they come. So it's a good kind of way to give people an ability to kind of investigate your church a little bit beforehand. But let me tell you what online is not. It is not the church. Like, there's no such thing as online church because there is no gathering. There is no assembly. And I know that's not a popular view these days, but I'll tell you, it's increasingly the view of young people. Like, people that are my age and younger, they're really not interested in this whole, like, let's just do everything online. They're not. They want to actually get together with flesh and blood people and hear them sing and shake their hand and feel the warmth of their embrace. Like, there is something really important about being physically together and worshiping God together. So I'm not saying that we abandon the word church because of all this linguistic stuff. I don't care about that. But what I am saying is that we need to properly define the church. And if we don't, we do so, we fail to do that to our own detriment, I think. But
I want to add just a little bit. In Turner, we have the Turner Retirement Home, and we have people that cannot get physically to our church. So we have set up at the same time streaming in the activity room, and they come in there for the activity of going to church together and taking communion. So in that respect, yes, they're gathering, they're taking communion.
And what I'm saying there, and I'm really, let me aim that critique a little bit more narrowly, because that's what I mean by if there are people who cannot otherwise get to that main gathering of the church, then I am all for, let's be really creative and let's be compassionate and love people and supply something that will still, so I'm all for that. What I am really critical of is the people that, and we had this comment in Central Oregon from somebody, like, man, it's really nice that I don't even have to like put on regular clothes to go to church. Okay, that's a horse of a different color, okay? And that's more what I'm really critical of, this idea that I can abdicate gathering with the people of God and still go to church. Like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that person is doing in that moment, but they're not actually meaningfully participating in the body of Christ. It's not that. So if that's a little bit more specific.
Certainly an indication of the individualism that
that's right.
we demand of our lives.
That's right. And I do think modern individualism and consumerism is maybe one of the greatest threats to the church today.
Could I add something to that?
Yeah.
After COVID, The Holy Spirit is there, and you can feel His Spirit.
That's right.
When you worship with Him.
That's right.
It's when we're all together. There's that
Yeah.
feeling that you get.
That's right. Yes. Yes. And like I said, that's what we're going to talk about today as we send off from here, that let us gather together. And then, but let's do that well, right? So like I said, the church is more than just a gathering. The gathering is like the basic thing. We gather together. How should we do that? That's what we're going to talk about. So let's not preempt that. So.
Do you get together with other churches?
We are.
As an individual with other pastors?
Yeah, I have done that, and I do that. Some of that got totally derailed by COVID. I mean, there just was a lot of isolation there, and that hasn't quite picked up yet. But so there are some different ministerial associations in Central Oregon that are just now starting out again. Some of that is, like it's taken me a little bit, so very personal to me. It's taken me a little bit to start to form some relationships in Central Oregon. I grew up in the Valley, so I have tons of relationships with pastors out here. I don't really know very many pastors in Central Oregon, and that takes time to build that, because I have gone to, I've gone to lunch with folks or whatever that from Christian churches or other churches in our city, like whatever. And sometimes I just realize pretty quickly, like, we have a way different understanding of like what we are doing, like what our jobs are. And so I'm not sure how much I'm going to really benefit from that. So, and like I said, part of that is like every person that has come to our church since I've been there from another church, the reason that they're doing that, and I never ask, and I don't want to know which churches, which churches have they gone to, I don't care. But I do hear every time people come and say, we're going to churches, or we were trying to find a church, and every church we went to, like, never opened the Bible while we were there. And so, frankly, like, I'm not really interested in connecting with that pastor. Like, I'm not, so there's that hurdle of like, yeah, I really want to connect with other like-minded pastors that are going to lead their churches, toward health, like all of these. But so that's been a little bit of a struggle too, is I think that there are a lot of churches in our country, but a lot of them are not doing well. They're not doing well. And I lament that, I grieve that, but also, like, I'm 34 years old. I don't have I've got my hands full with my church. I don't consider myself to be like a movement leader of any kind. And so I'm not really prepared at this point in my life to try to like mentor other pastors in trying to, you know what I mean? Like, I'll do that as I have opportunity, but I'm not seeking that out. I'm not seeking to try to generate a movement or something like that. I don't think I have the capacity, the wisdom to do that at this point. But
I appreciate what you were saying about gathering. I said, Hebrews 10:24.
that's what we're talking about today. Yeah, we're going there. That's absolutely right. We're talking Hebrews 10 today.
What kind of community outreach does your church? I know we have our small church in South Salem has certain things that our community outreach and.
Yep.
And then,
Repeat the question.
So what kind of community outreach things do we do? We are trying to just sense where the need is in Central Oregon. One of the things that our church does is we partner with a local organization called Shepherd's House that works a lot with the homeless community in Central Oregon. So part of that means that we have run a winter shelter at our church because it gets wicked cold for a long amount of time in Central Oregon, so cold enough to threaten people, really. So we've done that. This year we've partnered with a local homeschooling co-op because we're just seeing a drastic increase in the desire to homeschool kids. So not to go down that whole thing, but we are seeing that. A lot of people are really not wanting their kids to be in public school. So we're partnering with an organization to provide a co-op to help people, whether they're kind of first-time homeschool parents or not, but to have a community there. And then we do some events throughout the year to just kind of, we think it's a good thing to whatever ability that we can do to just do events that are a benefit and a joy to the community to come and do. So like last year we did a big fall festival to just give families a free activity to come. That was really fun. We had a bunch of inflatables and bounce houses and stuff and that kind of thing. We did that October 31st. So that kind of thing, we try to see where there's opportunities to do that.
Do you have specific prayer events?
We have, and we need to have more of these, is kind of one of the places that we've identified as a church is, and I've been kicking around an idea for a while of having like a Sunday night prayer service. We haven't done it yet. But we do have monthly, they used to be like our board meetings, and what we've changed that to be, because like nobody hears board meeting and says, yes, sign me up, I want to be there. And so what we've instead decided there is we want that to be a time of prayer for our church. And so it is a place where we're going to talk about a couple of relevant sort of business things that we want people to know about. But mostly the idea there is we're going to be just praying over our church. So that's the main thing that we're doing right now. But one of the things that I'd like to see our church do is add more corporate prayer gatherings.
So you brought up about, like when do you build? When do you expand?
Yes.
And choose different programs. And so looking into your future of your church, like we might need to do something.
Yep.
Okay, what would be steps or what would be the procedure?
Yeah, so I am very much like a congregationalist. What I mean by that is that I think that every major decision that the church makes, the church should make it. The members of the church have that right. So when it comes to major, like that kind of thing, I am not going to just make that decision, and the elders are not just going to just make that decision. Or there's going to be a process there where we pray over it, we talk about it, we seek the scriptures, we look at different things, then we bring to our church kind of what we've considered. We have people, give people a chance to ask questions. We talk about it. We get insight and feedback from people. We go back and kind of, okay, let's think some more and pray some more. So that we're not operating with a committee of 150 people, because that would just be madness. But we are meaningfully involving those 150 people at every step of the way. So that's kind of the general process. On something like that, to be honest with you, I'm a little bit nervous about that because right now, it's like we still have some capacity in our sanctuary, but if we add too many, more people, it's going to be a great problem because we want to see people have a healthy church to be a part of, and we want to see people come to Christ. But we'll have to see what we do. Now, my counsel to our church is I do not really want to see our church launch a second service. In the history of our church, in 1977, our church went from one service to two services, and then in the 1980s, our church had a whole lot of division. And I think that's not a coincidence. Because I do think, okay, if we go back to the church as an assembly, who is it that you gather with regularly to worship God with? All right, so if you're not really careful, and I'm not totally sure of the right way to do this, but if you're not really careful, if you move from one service to two services, you may be moving from one church to two churches. Mm-hmm. And so I don't like that idea. Now, I'm also not willing to turn people away at the door if we're running out of space. So what do we do? Well, we've got some things, some suggestions that we could give to our church. We would entertain some suggestions and brainstorm with our church a little bit, and then we'd talk that through with the elders, pray over it, kind of maybe narrow that down to some of our better options, bring that back to the church and say, all right, well, we kind of think we should weed this one out because of no, whatever. So we've come back with these options. Now what do people think? Like, let's get some feedback. Let's spend some time in prayer. Let's do all that. And then at some point, we just make a decision. But that decision, at the very final point, is a vote. It is a church, like, what are we going to do? And I think if the elders have done their job well and led the church well and counseled the church and involved people at every step, I think you're going to have a unanimous vote. So that's kind of basically, but that being said, that's still a very big and kind of messy process of like, what do we want to do? So in that specific example, as I've kind of brainstormed that, it's like, well, we launch a second service. We just do an overflow into our fellowship hall for a while. We do a serious renovation of our current building, or we move location. That's kind of our options. Or we plant a church. So I can't think of any other options for us, what we do. So really the process would be, hey, church, here's the 5 options. Does anybody have a 6th? That'd be the first. But short of that, like, what do we think about these 5? And then we just narrow that down. And so. Yeah, very good problems to have. We're happy with that. But
Anybody else? We got 2 minutes. Okay, we have a question. Thank you.
I'm going to go back to Friday night when we prayed for Fran and Gabriel and ask if there's an update.
Yeah, so
Not
Fran,
Friday night, that was Monday night.
Monday night, it's all good. Yeah, I was going to let that go. I was going to let that go. So the question there was how a couple of folks that we were praying for are doing. So my nephew, he's recovering well. He had the surgery, get his appendix out on Tuesday morning early. I know that they did something with CO2 that like flared up a nerve of his, and he was in quite a bit of pain on Tuesday, but I think that's faded, and so he's recovering. He was telling me, because I've called him every day that we've been here to just check on him and stuff, and he's telling me, yeah, I'm not going to be able to play football for 2 weeks. And I was like, that sounds crazy. You're going to be playing football in 2 weeks? He's 12 years old. So he's doing okay.
How old is this young man?
12.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm like, wow, your body recovers a lot faster than mine does from these kinds of things. So.
My nephew is as big as you.
No, not yet. And I keep telling him, I'm like, because he's like, yeah, the day's going to come when I'm going to whoop you, Uncle Brian. I'm like, that day will never come. Okay? Yeah. Oh, yeah, he's going to be a big kid. Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to talk too much about him because he's being recorded, right? They're going to be on like YouTube or something. So but I'll tell you, come see me after this, and I have a hilarious story that I'll tell you about him. But yeah, he's gonna be a big dude. So as far as our member of our church, she had a stroke, and so then she had some bleeding and swelling at the back of her brain. And right now, the specific prayer request is that the doctors are going to let it go, because she can still hold a conversation with you. She's doing well as far as being able to interact. She's lucid. She's able to, but they are wanting that swelling to go down. And so typically they're hopeful and expectant that the swelling will go down within 4 days. If it doesn't, then there's an issue there, and they'll have to relieve pressure surgically. So right now, that's the specific prayer need there.
David?
I really respect your youth and where you're at, and doing a great job, but what are your plans for bringing up the generation behind you to become church leaders?
Yeah. That's a huge concern of mine. I think in the history of our church, one of the things where we've kind of stumbled is the succession of leadership. And so that tells me that I want to be thinking even right now about what is going to, legacy. So there's going to come a day when it is time for me to pass the torch of ministry and leadership to someone else. And so there's 2 things I want to avoid there. One is, I don't want to wait too long to do that, right? There comes a point, I think, for every leader when it's a good time to step away. And if you go past that, it's like a comedian, right? Like leave them laughing. Like leave them wanting more kind of thing. Now, I'm not saying the pastor's not a comedian. I'm just saying similar principle there of like leave when your ministry is strong. Don't wait until it's become something else. So I don't want to do that. And number two is we have not in our church, and I think this is probably many churches, we have not actually prepared someone else well to take over. So we need to do a good job of that. Right now what that means is, and part of this is why I say, I'm more comfortable giving a rebuke or correction to a younger man. Well, part of that is because I'm actually involved in really discipling younger men in our church. And so there's an established relationship of a type that is kind of a mentor-mentee relationship. And I don't have that same relationship with the older men in my church. So part of why I don't want to really give a stiff rebuke if that's needed. But anyway, so what that means right now is that I'm trying to take, frankly, what I've gotten from seminary and turn it into a form that is graspable by someone who's not in seminary and that doesn't cost them many thousands of dollars, but still give them the basic thing. So I'm right now, for example, there's a group of 3 young men that is meeting at my home early on Saturday mornings, and we are discussing a systematic theology book that I'm having them read. And as they go through that, I'm having them write their own sort of personal theological statements on the major areas of Christian doctrine, so that they have for themselves a resource and a kind of theological statement that they have crafted themselves. So they go through and they're going to craft a statement on the doctrine of who is God, the doctrine of the Word, what is the Bible, the doctrine of humanity, of sin. So these major areas of Christian theology. So we're working through that. I'm trying to give a light seminary education to some of the young guys in my church.
Do you have any plans to encourage them to go like you did to Hope or to some undergraduate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we absolutely encourage Christian higher education. So I'm not, what I just said there is not, I don't want that to be construed as I don't want people to go to Bible college or seminary. I do. That have been profoundly enriching things in my life. But I don't know that that's for everybody per se. And I would like the lay leaders in our church to also have a theological education, even if they're not going to go spend 30 grand at seminary. So yeah, we do encourage that where we see people that maybe want to go into vocational ministry. But we also just want everybody to be. So I'm a big proponent of, we have a whole table out in our fellowship hall of books that I think are good, healthy, good books to read. And some of them are, more geared toward kids. Some of them are theological. There's a book on our table called Delighting in the Trinity. And it's a book on the Trinity. And it is incredible. And so we recommend people in our church, read more books. Read more books. It is astounding how many people in our culture today do not read. Mm-hmm. How many people today, something like 80% of American adults have not read a book in the last 5 years. And I just think we need to read. Oh my gosh, the gift that is. Anyway.
Yep.
All right, well.
All right, folks, thank you for your questions. Brian, thank you for your answers.
Thank you.